Hi guys, and welcome back to Manch Talk. I'm Carla Garrick, your host, and I do have a guest today, but before we get to that, I wanted to talk just very briefly about the TSA. Having just gotten back from Greenville, South Carolina for my mom's memorial, I had one of my less than pleasant experiences with the TSA. And I did a whole X live on this yesterday. So if you're looking for the content, please go find that on my feed or of course always on my website, carlagarrick.com. But I was very excited to discover that there is a Abolish the TSA bill that is currently in front of Congress, introduced by a couple of senators. And I think as libertarians or liberty lovers here in the great state of New Hampshire, we should all get behind that bill and see if we can abolish the TSA. I'm going to give you some horrifying stats very quickly. They have 56,000 employees. They have a 90 to 95% failure rate on their own tests that their own departments do, which basically means someone puts a gun in a suitcase, pushes it through, and it goes through. They have a $1.8 billion with a B budget, and reminder, 56,000 employees. There have been 30,000 misconduct cases filed and over 500 arrests against the TSA. They violated my rights, and I am going to do everything humanly possible to see the TSA go away. So there is this bill, Abolish the TSA Act. Currently, it doesn't seem to have a lot of interest, but maybe we can all together drum it up. But I just wanted to mention that. I'll go in a deep dive next week. But I wanted to put it on everyone's radars first. Now we get to talk about fun stuff with my guest, my colleague from Porcupine Real Estate, Dominic DeMaria.
Yes.
DeMaria. And we're going to move out the camera so we can see everyone. Hi, Dominic.
Hey, how are you, Carla?
Thanks for joining me. So Dominic and I work together for Porcupine Real Estate. He's been in this profession for how many years now?
This will be my 4th year, I think. I'm due for renewal this year, so yeah, I think this is for going on 5. So.
Okay, because folks back home know this, I just renewed mine maybe last month, so that was my first renewal. He smokes me a lot on a lot of deals, so I'm really got him on the show so that he can teach me all the tricks of the trade. But why don't we tell folks back home just a little bit about what you're seeing currently in the New Hampshire market?
Sure. So I know it's popular for a lot of people to say that there's a recession coming, or there's, I'm not a financial planner, I'm not an analyst or anything along those lines. I can only speak from my personal experience in the market. And based off the opinions of a lot of the lenders that I work with on a pretty regular basis. But what we're seeing is, there's a lot of people hesitant to get into a market with something like that looming on the horizon. But I think the biggest thing that I always try to express to people is that New Hampshire is a very aggressive buyer's market right now. I'm sorry, seller's market right now.
Seller's market, okay.
I
was not going, no, I have it totally wrong.
Yeah. It's one of those, it's very hard to find a great deal in this current market. Unless you're selling a house. If you're selling a house, you're golden, you're going to do really well pretty much across the board. I do have some stats we can get to as far as average house prices by county. But in general, yeah, it's just still very tough to buy a house unless you're very well prepared. Cash is always going to be king. Even in a different market than this, It would be as well. But it's just because there's the least amount of risk to the person selling their house.
So, yeah, and New Hampshire to me feels slightly unique to other places, right? Because, as an open free stater, I see so many appealing things about New Hampshire, right? We've got low taxes, we've got, accessible state house. We do have a housing shortage, though, right?
That's very true.
So it feels like, there's demand for people who want to come in, but what are we seeing on the supply side?
So the supply side, yes, you're absolutely right. I think the most recent thing that I had heard, this was a while back, but we're like 70,000 units under where we're supposed to be as far as like inventory goes for people looking to live in New Hampshire. And I think what really stands in the way of a lot of that is the zoning laws and really not allowing expansion within these smaller towns for more development. There's a lot of people, and I'm sure you've brought this up on the show before, but the NIMBY principle, which is not in my backyard. And people want expansion, they want people to have housing, they want affordability, but they're not willing to have it next to them.
Right.
You know, so it's one of those catch-22s where you can't have it both ways. You have to make a decision on what makes the most sense for your town and really vote that way.
Right. And I mean, I'm always amused when I hear those sort of NIMBY arguments because it's a very short step between building a granny flat above your apartment, which totally makes sense, right? Because it's like, maybe they're students or someone who's in an entry-level job and they're just kind of looking for something in a suburban area. Maybe they don't want to be downtown. But it's sort of like, it's like we go from granny flat to pig farmer within like 3 breaths, right? And so people immediately start to make these like very anti-growth arguments, and they sort of become extremely alarmist, right? Like so with the NIMBYism also comes, I think, a responsibility for us to remind people, look, the likelihood of if we expand zoning a little bit so that we can catch up on these 90,000 units that we need, it doesn't mean that, you know, your neighbor is going to put in a nuclear reactor.
Yeah, and you know, with our community specifically, because we do help a lot of Free Staters find housing here, there's a list that's published which has the towns in New Hampshire which have no zoning whatsoever. And from an outside perspective, you're like, oh yeah, no zoning, I can do whatever I want. And I always tell people, it's like, that's a catch-20, or it's a double-edged sword, because just because you can do whatever you want, that also means your neighbor can do whatever they want. So it goes both ways. You know, you'll drive through those places and you'll see these gorgeous houses and like, you know, just beautiful estates, large acreages and things like that. And then you'll drive by somebody who's got 16 cars in their driveway because it's, you know, and they're all up on blocks or something like that. It's completely overgrown. And it's, you know, that's freedom, right? I mean, you get to do whatever you want, but so can your neighbor.
Right, and that's freedom, but that, you know, we always like to say with freedom comes personal responsibility, right? So you want to actually be building a community of good neighbors, right? Like that's kind of the thing. Instead of everyone being like, well, I have the right to, it's kind of like, well, we want to build a community where it's like, you know, we kind of have, we think it should kind of look this way. But, you know, there's been a lot of controversy up at the State House with various bills, some of it zoning, some of it having to do with ADUs. So those are the, you know, adjacent dwelling units, or I forget the actual terms for it. So HB 577, can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's actually very exciting. This was a bill that's been proposed, and it actually just got through the House and the Senate. And this one actually allows you to have, it's allowed, ADUs are allowed by all municipalities up to 950 square feet, so without restriction.
Oh, wow.
So like, I guess it's still pending town approval. Like you can't just like put it right on the, you know, right on the sidewalk or anything along those lines. Like you'd still have to follow building codes and things like that.
Okay.
But you're not allowed to tell people they cannot
do it.
Correct.
That is pretty exciting because, again, you know, when people look at this issue, I think, you know, we live in a time of polarization, right? So every time like something is about to change, it's like we can't just have like a normal reasoned conversation about it. Everyone's got to take these like crazy anchors on the sides. But I was thinking the other day, even in South Africa, you know, when I was in law school, I lived in an ADU. I lived in someone else's backyard and in a nice little thatched roof, you know, 2-bedroom place. But I was there because I wanted to be in that neighborhood, but I couldn't afford a house there yet, right?
And I think the thing that that strikes a lot of people on this one, or that people forget, I should say, is that you're still required to meet the septic and you know, the setbacks and everything else that are allowed for building on that property. So like you can't just put another 2-bedroom ADU on a house that only has a 3-bedroom system that's already a 3-bedroom. So you'd have to expand the infrastructure of the property still needs to match the needs of the property. So like, yes, it sounds great. I can put a little tiny home in the back of my property, but I need to have a plan in place to dispose of everything that's going to be disposed of that property. So.
Right, and that makes sense. And of course, I'm also you do a lot of homesteading properties, right? So in that arena, I'm so fascinated with the developments that are happening, both solar, but even just composting toilets and like these drone deliveries, which we're going to have one day. But you're right, of course, if you either have city sewer or you have septic, like you're still gonna have to jump through some hoops. So when the naysayers are saying, oh, it's just gonna be a free-for-all and it's just gonna be, chaos and communism, I forget, I don't know, half the people are like, we're anarchists, the other half are like, we're communists. Maybe we're just people who believe in growth and progress and
right.
And sometimes things have to change, know. Yes.
Well, and I think that'll be a wake-up call for a lot of people too, because I talk to a lot of people who want to live isolated and want to live in the middle of nowhere and just have their own little homestead, even if it's a tiny home that's 800 square feet or something along those lines. But they don't realize, they look at those prices of those homes and it's like, oh, you can buy this for $100,000 and I can just put it on a piece of property. But it's like, yeah, but you have to put in a well. You have to put in a septic, you have to put in electric or off-grid or whatever it's going to be like that. So you look at that $100,000 plus the cost of the land, plus the cost of the utilities, plus everything else. And if it's super remote, it's going to be hard to get somebody out there to do that work.
Right.
Unless you're planning on doing it yourself. And by all means, if you can, great.
Right.
But like, you're looking at the same price to build a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom home on a piece of property or thereabouts as you would be to put a tiny home, like a 900 square foot tiny home. And then you start weighing the difference between them and you're like, well, I might as well just build a regular house. And then you're out of the game. So.
Right, right. And I do feel, I personally thought there was so much promise in the tiny home space, and there were a lot of free staters who will talk about, can we buy like a large piece of property and, put this in. I see challenges with those kinds of ideas. So tell us a little bit, like do you have any listings at the moment?
Yeah, we actually do have one currently. It's a land property in Henniker, New Hampshire. It's just over 7 acres. And it's right next to Pat's Peak.
Oh, wow.
It's a zoned commercial/residential. It's a mixed-use parcel. And it's reasonably priced. It's $118,000. And it's right on 114, I believe, is that road in Henniker. And we recently went under contract on it, but it did fall out. The buyer got cold feet based on a couple of different things. But we have no doubt that it's going to sell. It's a beautiful property. It's a great location for the right person. So.
And of course, for folks watching maybe live on Facebook, Pat's Peak is one of our skiing areas. 114 is my trauma highway because that's the road I got arrested on way back when because I was taking my skis back to Pat's Peak. I'd gotten seasonal tickets and hardly used them and everything. But yeah, that property, that's a great location. There is skiing in that area. A lot of these ski places also are open in the summer and they do like summer programs and all of that. So Henniker has, I think the university might have closed down.
I don't know.
There is a arts college downtown, but it's a very quaint New England town.
And it's very centrally located as far as like it's commutable to Manchester, to Keene. It's kind of in that nice area in the middle there. Very similar to Ware. So yeah, right next door.
Which is where I got arrested at the 114. Yes. So, all right. So we said it is kind of a seller's market at the moment. Are you seeing what are you seeing because the interest rates? We probably have to talk about that a little bit. Sure. Where are we? We're at like
mid-sevens.
Mid-sevens.
Yeah.
Okay. So when the interest rates are high, and correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, so when the interest rates are high, a lot of times there's not an incentive for people to buy, right? Because it's expensive. The people who are in a home that have a low rate, will take me by example, let's say my rate was 2.4 or something, 2015. There's no incentive, although I love my house and I would be hard pressed to sell it. There really is no incentive for me to go, okay, well, this was my first home. Now I've got to go do, I want to upscale a little, or get the place on the lake I've always wanted.
Right.
I was looking at some properties, and for anyone who doesn't live here who wants that lake living, I mean, it is primo, beautiful.
Absolutely. There's no shortage of lakes in New Hampshire, so
Right.
you don't have to be on Winnipesaukee. Like those are the expensive ones. I mean,
Yeah,
but there are just as many that are beautiful out there.
In fact, Mark and I went up yesterday to see a property in the Upper Valley area, so just outside New London. And it's not on Lake Ossipee, which of course, not Ossipee, Sunapee. This one was just on Otter Pond, right? But it's still like this really nice body of water. The houses on the other side are far away. I could already picture looking through the bay window what the fall would look like there with all the colors. I mean, it really is just... It just really is quite spectacular here.
Absolutely, yeah. And what you were saying too about the interest rates, that's 100% correct. Yes, it doesn't make sense for somebody like me. I bought in 2021, I believe, when we first moved here, and we were at 3% or 3.1 or 3.2, right around there. My wife does all the financials, so I don't know. But yeah, there's no incentive for me to get into something else, because why would I? I'm going to be paying. My buying power is just not nearly as what it would have been back then as it is now.
Right.
So yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. And there's no affordable, low-cost housing out there for people who are just trying to get into the market, which prevents first-time home buyers from trying to get in because your money just doesn't go as far. So.
Right, and to be honest, I'm hearing a fair amount of frustration from younger people who do want to move to New Hampshire or who have moved. Let's say young professionals, late 20s, early 30s, maybe even up to 40 now, because we're living longer, so these windows become bigger, right? And there is some real frustration because of the pricing. So let's talk a little bit, like, what is the median sort of house price
So
right
it does
now?
vary from area to area in the state. We have a variety of different counties here, and the ones that the general rule of thumb is the more north you go, the further your dollar's going to go. I did write down some stats from the monthly New Hampshire Realtors Association here. And Coos County, the average home price is $249,000.
Oh, okay.
So it's still fairly reasonable. Those are on the market from the time they go on the market to the time they go off the market. 141 days is the average.
Oh, wow, it's a big
so
difference.
So it's very different than down here. So like we're in...
Because down here, I was reading, I think like the average in Nashua is like 16 days or something.
Yeah. So yeah, Rockingham County, Hillsborough County, they're both... So Rockingham, average price is $660,000. And that is what they sell at. That's not what they list at, that's what they sell at. And an average of 31 days from the time of listing to closing.
Wow.
So that's very, very fast.
Wow.
Almost no time. Because if you're using a lender, it takes generally 30 days is what they say. Sometimes if you have everything lined up, you can get less than that, but unless it's a cash sale, then it can go pretty quickly.
Right, and so just, for folks back home, cash is king. But most people, especially if you're a first home time buyer, unless you like invested in crypto way back for 7 cents on the dollar or whatever, you're probably going to be using a lender.
Yeah.
And and we with Porcupine Real Estate, we have people we work with, and they're great. But yeah, you should be building in that 30-day window at least, and probably if you're even just having the inkling that hey, I think I'm going to want to be buying in the next 3 to 6 months, they should be looking at credit scores, opting out of whatever that thing is that
there's
Chris
a privacy
Nadeau
one.
tells us every time.
There's a privacy one that if you don't want calls every day, you want to sign up for the list from
Right.
the lender has a thing that you sign off on, and it's fantastic. So
so that you don't get bombarded. I mean, I'm currently it's not a housing thing or a banking thing, but I'm being bombarded by like some IRS scam people, and they are calling from all over the country.
As soon as we started advertising phone numbers, because like we're public figures now as far as like being a realtor. I literally get like 4 or 5 calls a day.
Yeah.
A day.
My block button is hot right now. All right, so 660 in Rockingham,
Yes.
31 days.
And I don't know if you want to go through all of them, but we can.
Yeah, because
I mean,
it's
so
interesting to me.
Grafton County, which is also in the northern, I would say, third of the state.
Right, and kind of a little more remote, lots of other places that don't necessarily have zoning. Massive, massive bear problem.
435,000 is the average home price, and it's on the market for 59 days.
Okay.
So that's about twice what
yeah.
we're seeing down here. And another interesting statistic too that I wrote down here is how many of the houses actually get listing price. So 94% of the houses in Grafton get list price.
Oh, interesting.
So there's still a chance to get under asking
Right.
down there. Well, conversely, back in Rockingham, 98%, and in Hillsborough, 101%, meaning nothing goes under
asking.
in Hillsborough. So,
But like, okay, so those are the stats and those are the things that are reported, right? What is like sort of your lived experience with it? Because
Sure.
I feel like, I look at my inbox and I'm like, okay, there are a lot of listings, right? So for folks, obviously early spring slow, but spring really things start to explode. Yeah. Winter is usually kind of slow, and you can just see it in your inbox, right? Suddenly, like it was like a light switch went on, and it was like, boom! Look at all these listings.
And I tell a lot of folks this too when they start looking. Be prepared to move in winter, because that is honestly the best time to buy and sell something, because you'll have the least amount of competition, and you'll have, definitely a smaller pool of available properties.
Sure.
However, there's less people looking in those months. So
Yes.
if you can time it so you're actually going to close in February or March, oh yeah, you're going to be really, really well set up. And again, this is all general. I'm not making any promises or anything like that.
I love that advice though, because that would also give us a whole season, a whole year of work, as opposed to it being
me, I believe
kind
I
of
had
seasonal.
4 closings by the end of March. So it was, you time it correctly by the end of last year, kind of getting things lined up, and it's good. It's a good way to be.
And there is something interesting. We talked about this because I'm fresher, I'm newer than Dominic, and one of the experiences I had, which I think I talked about on the show, is I sold a house in Laconia to a gentleman. It's on 7 acres. It's got a really beautiful view, kind of high on the hill looking down on the lake, which you couldn't even see at the time we were looking in early September. But it was a longer close. And so by October, when we went up for the final walkthrough, the leaves were down. And it was an entirely different property, right? So there is something about buying in winter where you're like, okay, you are going to know exactly what you're buying, because sometimes in summer, it's very forested here, it's very vegetative, it's green, and you might have, a wall of trees there, and so it wouldn't even occur to you that there's a neighbor behind that. But in winter, you'll be like, oh, there's another house there.
I know.
There's my neighbor's ADU.
Back in New York, I had a decent-sized property, and like the first year we were there, we were like, I think it was 3 months into having the house, we were like, oh yeah, we have a backyard. Like, because you're so focused on the house itself, you don't even look at the property because you're depending on the time of the year you move in. So yeah.
So business is heating up, obviously. I think we have about 5 minutes left. So what do you think we should talk about here? I'm going to look at my notes and see, this claimed, so I actually asked the AI just kind of like, what are 10 points about current stuff in New Hampshire's real estate market? And it does talk about the regional variations that we just talked about, affordability challenges. It actually says Manchester has a hotspot status and that it's the #1 housing market in the U.S.
I always see these things, and I doubt a lot of them, to be completely honest. I don't know. I don't know where they're pulling their information from, but yeah.
Right.
I know for me, and New Hampshire in general is a great place. It's an awesome place, but I didn't move to New Hampshire to live in a city.
Right.
So personally, Manchester and Nashua and a lot of the bigger towns are just at the bottom of my list of places that I would want to see myself. And I know there's a lot of people out there who feel that way, but also Manchester is the center of, community. Right. I mean, there's a lot of things to do here. There's a lot of people to meet. There's a lot of things like that. So I know this is where a lot of people end up.
And also, once you understand the nuances of the market, like we bought in Manchester, but we actually feel like we're in the country because we don't really have neighbors. We're on a cul-de-sac, and so
Absolutely.
you can find those places. But you can go over to Goffstown or Penardville or
Even Hooksett has a lot of,
right? And those are just next to Manchester. They're, if you're interested, they're probably a little more conservative or Republican leaning. But again, you could be downtown in like 10 minutes.
People don't understand how small the state is. I mean, like somebody was asking me the other day, like, well, how many people live in your town? And I was like, I think like 5,000.
Right.
Like, I don't know. Like, I could probably name a good chunk of them. So.
And then, of course, when people are looking to buy, things they should look at is the zoning. What your taxes are. I think that's an important one.
Huge.
Because
they vary drastically from town to town. Like, I live in Epping, and my tax rate is roughly twice what somebody 10 minutes away from me is. Just because of location, different things that the town offers.
And of course,
programs.
the coast, if we're going to generalize, obviously the southern bend is kind of feeding a little bit into Boston, right? So that's a little bit commuter, there are businesses and stuff, but, it is the southern. And so that's why it's a little more expensive. And of course, also Massachusetts is the gift that keeps giving for us, because not only do they now have the millionaire's tax, which they introduced, they are trying to introduce a mansion's tax, which would be 2 to 4% extra closing fees on top of the millionaire's tax. So they're really trying to drive their...
And if I remember correctly on that one, isn't the threshold is so unreasonably low that it's like, well, everybody could be a mansion tax at a certain point.
Well, yeah, because $1 million house in Massachusetts isn't even that anymore, right? And some of these prices are just because of the inflation, right? So, I look at my house, which I bought for, was originally listed for like $390. I got it for like $246 after making a $200,000 offer and being rejected out of hand. And I was like, oh, other states, I was like, come dance. And they were like, no. But I'm glad I did it, because that really did help with the negotiation.
It helps you learn too,
Yeah. All right, so we're up against the clock here. So I think I rolled over my own mic, but let folks know how they can reach you.
Sure. So you can reach me at porcupinerealestate.com. That's going to lead you to any of the agents that are associated with us. You can reach me specifically at dominic@porcupinerealestate.com if you have any specific questions for me. Call the office, any of those good things. I mean, I assume we put up the information,
Well, we just yell it out here, and we hope for the best. But Dominic will be at PorcFest as well, the Porcupine Freedom Festival. That's coming up in about a month's time in the North Country. If you're watching this and you're planning to come, reach out to us. We would actually love to show you guys houses while you're coming up, or even just, be like you're driving. If you're driving, you're coming, through the Notch, through the North Country, even just going to look at properties around Lancaster to give you a sense of what's up there. So definitely reach out to Dominic or to me. Porcupine Real Estate will get you to us. Thank you for joining us, and we will be back again. We're going to make this a monthly thing, hopefully.
I think that'll be great.
And we'll start telling you guys about more listings and stuff. But thanks for joining us, and I will be back here not next week, because I will be at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas, but the week after that. Thanks, guys.
Okay.